Hello people, and welcome to Crypto Exposed. Amplify ETF's report says Ripple Mastercard pilot directly boosts XRP demand. Okay guys, let's get into it. Okay, so really like to see this because of course what we really need at the moment, to be honest with you, is, as I've said before, move away from all this hype, all this fantasy stuff, and let's just get to like the real, facts and evidence that can help us to show what's going to try and build up XRP's value, what's going to try and make it more appealing as an asset and help to, deliver price, which is what we're all obviously hoping for, right? And so when I look at this, I'm glad to see that this is something that isn't just something that just impacts just RLUSD, because a lot of people again are worried that RLUSD is going to kind of take over XRP, the asset. And as I've said, I don't think that would happen first and foremost just because they're going to use RLUSD on the XRP ledger anyway. So in that regard, it's always going to help. But you also want to see like what positives can it bring to the network as a whole, right? Not just, volume and stuff like that. Like how is it going to help in other ways too? So let's get into this then. Got some information here that I'm going to go through for you. So how the pilot connects to XRP demand. While RLUSD is for settlement, the report highlights that XRP remains central to the XRPL ecosystem. XRP secures the network, pays transaction fees, and supports on-ledger liquidity through mechanisms such as automated market makers. Amplify ETFs notes that higher transaction volumes from credit card settlements could translate into organic XRP demand, especially if the pilot expands to merchant conversations, reward programs, or more payment flows. In this structure, XRP's role grows alongside network usage rather than relying on speculative activity alone. Compliance edge over Visa and Solana rivals. The report also highlights Ripple and Mastercard's compliance positioning as a competitive advantage. With WebBank ensuring regulatory standards, the pilot is one of the first regulated US bank integrations of a public blockchain for credit card settlements. Amplify ETF argues that this gives Ripple and Mastercard a first mover advantage over rivals such as Visa's Ethereum-based pilots and Solana's Shopify-linked payment initiatives. This potentially allows XRPL to capture a portion of the multi-trillion-dollar card payments market. Okay, real great stuff here, real great stuff. So as I've been saying, don't get me wrong, RLUSD is seeming to be like the settlement layer that they're using in regards to the asset. But I've said this to you before, like it's seeming clearer and clearer over time that with banks, they're going more towards stablecoin for remittances. So I think this is just Ripple reading the room, to be honest with you. I think they can just see that stablecoin seems to be the way that banks are going, and they have their own stablecoin. For me, what I will say is, obviously, they're going to use the stablecoin, the RLUSD, on the XRP ledger. So in that regard, it is going to add to volume. But as you saw here, it's also adding to supporting the network, protecting the network, gas fees, which is obviously volume, and also adding, liquidity. So to me, I still think overall this is going to be a positive for XRP as well. And at the end of the day, like I've said it before, when it comes to what people will deem a valuable asset, it's about what the network can do as a whole anyway. So even if RLUSD is being used, right, it's still being used on the XRP ledger. So for example, let's just say this pilot was to be put into actual, real life settings. So they say, okay, we're going to move on from the pilot and we're actually going to use the XRP ledger from now on for payments, for card payments, right? Let's just say you start to see in the future, Ripple just getting this huge coverage because they've got, the clearing house, they've got the banking license, they've got this whole partnership with Mastercard doing debit card payments, and they start to speak to Ripple and they say, hey, how is it that you guys are doing all this stuff? Like, how is it that you've got this huge advantage over the traditional rails? And they say, well, we use blockchain technology. Oh, that's interesting. Can you tell us a bit more about this? Well, yeah, we use the XRP ledger, which is, lightning fast, and the fees are dirt cheap, pretty much, nothing. It's very efficient, it's very safe, it's very secure, a lot better than the traditional rails. So this is the technology that we're currently using, and we use it by the XRP token that's based on the XRP ledger. And they're like, oh, okay, like, wow, that sounds like a really interesting new technology. This is something that sounds very valuable if it can, like basically run all these new traditional rails on it and basically, upgrade the financial system. Yeah, it really is. And so this is the kind of thing where people start seeing this stuff and they'll start to want to invest in it, right? Because they'll deem it a valuable asset. That's the kind of stuff that they'll look at and say, wow, that sounds good. That sounds great if this technology can do all these things and it can, upgrade all these current old methods and it makes things way faster and way cheaper. It's the newer version of the older system. Like, yeah, that sounds really good. Maybe I should invest in that. And that's as simple as what it is. Like, it's just people getting the idea that it's a valuable asset based on what it can do performance-wise. So, for me personally, I think this is good to see. And again, it's Ripple showing you that, these partnerships are to still try and add value to the XRP ledger as well. Again, they are a business. So at the end of the day, even though they could say we're going to do it directly through XRP, if stablecoins are the way forward, I can't really fault them for going with what's the obvious choice, because if they wasn't to do the stablecoin thing, then maybe they would miss out on the partnership altogether. So I'm not going to begrudge them of that. My thing is just make sure that you stick to the XRP ledger, right? Because a lot of our USD is on Ethereum. So if they was to turn around and do it on Ethereum, then yeah, I'll be honest with you, I'd completely take issue with that. But it wouldn't make any sense for them to do that, because that's taking a lot of value away from the XRP ledger. And at the end of the day, the XRP escrow is what they control. So for them, making XRP more valuable is the obviously better choice. So while I can understand that, Ethereum's the bigger network, they're actually shooting themselves in the foot if they was to choose Ethereum, because they're bringing a whole load of value over to a whole other network. And then, this escrow that they have is losing out on potential value that could help increase, the price of XRP. So I just don't see that being a logical step that they would take. So yeah, like I say, this is the kind of stuff that for me is really good to see. And also the interesting thing was in regards to them talking how, Ripple and XRP having this advantage over Ethereum and Visa and Solana's Shopify linked payment initiative. So to me, again, this is where you're seeing the flaws in these other networks, right? Even though these other networks might be higher in price, etc. Now, when I say price, I want to be careful there, because, you got to understand that things play a part in how high prices get, the market cap, the circulating supply. So you're never going to necessarily just get one XRP to equate to the same price as Solana and have the same price, because XRP would have to have a way bigger market cap to get to the price of Solana, right? But the point that I am making is, when it comes to, a utility aspect here in regards to how XRP is performing, it seems like it's got that edge over Ethereum and Solana. Now, I'm not surprised to hear that, to be honest with you. I've always thought, based on my research, that XRP is the better choice of Ethereum and Solana. I've always, believed that from what I've done on my personal research. So I'm not surprised to see that, but I'm glad to see it, because it's getting that confirmation, and it's also letting other people see that information too, right? Because at the end of the day, a lot of people just base this stuff off of hype right now and speculation. So for example, if Solana is really doing well, they just think, oh, okay, that's the better chain to use, or Ethereum, because it's the top 2 cryptocurrency. They just assume it's this great network to use, when realistically, from a security standpoint, from a fee standpoint, from a congestion standpoint, it's one of the worst networks you can use. Do you know what I mean? But yet people will use it, one, because I do think there's a lot of shadiness going on. If I'll be honest with you, that's my personal speculation. And two, it's just the top 2 cryptocurrency. So people just go by, oh, well, it's the top 2 cryptocurrency, so we'll use that. I think if people could use Bitcoin, they would, but Bitcoin's even worse than Ethereum. So Ethereum's kind of Bitcoin doesn't have smart contracts, right? Whereas Ethereum does. So it's okay, this isn't great, but it's the top 2 cryptocurrency. So I guess this is what's got the bigger community. It's got the most liquidity, etc. So we'll go with that. But it's hey, if you actually understand how crypto works and you want, the actual best functioning asset, then Ethereum's really not the best choice, right? So it is what it is, but this is why I'm saying it's good to see this kind of stuff, because the facts are the facts, right? Facts don't care about feelings at the end of the day. Ethereum it's just inferior to XRP. It just is. The only benefit that Ethereum has over XRP is that it just natively has smart contracts. And that's the thing as well. Like, I will say this, like, you've got to understand that they were built in two different ways, right? Whereas, Ethereum was trying to do smart contracts and trying to target a certain type of market. XRP was specifically targeting payments and banks. And that's why they don't have smart contracts, because theirs was more about just moving value. That was the whole vision of XRP at the beginning. That was the point. It was supposed to be a better version of Bitcoin, a better version of a peer-to-peer payment system than Bitcoin. And it succeeded at that, but because of that, they didn't focus on smart contracts, because that's just not where their vision was. So at the end of the day, like, you have got to understand that there are differences as well in that regard. But yeah, I'm just happy to see this stuff coming out and just showing you guys that yes, they are still trying to get that value to XRP. And, XRP is still getting that adoption. It's still having these people and these companies and these institutions doing pilots and partnerships, etc. with Ripple and trying to use the XRP ledger. All that stuff is still going on. So if we can get just more stuff of this coming in 2026 as we go into greater adoption, hopefully regulations and things like that, then hopefully we'll be in a position where, this will be great for us in the long term. But this is the kind of stuff that I like to see. I don't really want to see all this nonsense about, people secretly saying the governments are secretly working with Ripple and they're just waiting to flip the switch. I want to see stuff like this, because this is the stuff that's a lot more factual, it's a lot more evidence-based, and it's a lot more realistic. It's based on utility. It's not based on all these conspiracy theories and stuff happening behind the scenes that no one can prove. This is actual data that we have here. And that to me is what I think is a lot more reliable to go on, to think about how XRP will gain value, than all these predictions that is coming out of thin air and just saying it's going to go to this price by this date because of these things that I can't back up, or I've got no evidence to say why, but this is just what's going to happen. I just I'm just tired of all that. So this is great to see, and once again just another reason to be a bit more optimistic about XRP's long-term future. Thank you very much for watching this. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell. Take care.